Welcome to GPS, God's Prophetic Surprises, the program which takes an intergenerational approach to the book of Revelation. I'm Jon Paulien. I'm professor of religion at Loma Linda University. And next to me is
Iris Mamier. I'm an associate professor at the School of Nursing at Loma Linda University.
Okay, and Gustavo Assis. It is so good to be back here. I'm a pastor at the two churches in Orange County, Anaheim and Orange, and has been a pleasure to join you guys in discussing Revelation.
I'm Guilherme Borda. I'm a PhD student in New Testament at Andrews University and an associate pastor at the Menton Adventist Church, not far from here.
Mm-hmm. And as you may notice, somebody arranged to have sort of a side-to-side between the Germans and the Brazilians today.
I'm glad it's not soccer.
Yeah. Anyway, yes, that's a great match when it happens, isn't it? Germany and Brazil, they've had some...
Now they have the last laugh, right?
Yeah, well, so far. Yeah. Anyway, but we're glad to be back with you again, and we are approaching the end of chapter 17 in the book of Revelation, and I'm going to ask Iris if she would read the very last verse. So get your Bible out. Revelation 17 and verse 18, the very last verse of the chapter.
All right. It reads, "The woman that you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth."
All right, so this woman here, if you've been following us through chapter 17, is called Babylon. She rides on the beast, which is worldwide secular power. It portrays an end-time situation where institutional religion and institutional governance unite together to attempt to overcome the work of God and the work of His people. So as you look carefully through the book of Revelation, it seems clear that chapter 17 is an end-time chapter. But here's the interesting piece, folk. You'll notice that it's written in present tense. It says that the woman is the great city, which was called Babylon early on, which has rule, which is, present tense, ruling over the kings of the earth. And so you may be familiar that there's four basic approaches to the book of Revelation. There's the preterist approach, which says book of Revelation is written for its own time, basically. It's not necessarily a prophecy. There's the futurist approach. Book of Revelation has nothing to do with John's day. It's just all about the future. There's the idealist approach that says Revelation's not about history or details. It's simply a spiritual guideline. It's symbolism of great spiritual values. And then the fourth position is historicism, which is the one that generally our program has followed. And that is that the book of Revelation is God outlining guidance, not just for the first century, not just for the last one, but all the way through history, giving us guidance along the way. So, what do you make of this? In the middle of what seems like an end-time thing, suddenly talking present tense. And this is an explanation. Mm-hmm. This is not a vision. And a vision you can go anytime and any place. Yeah. But John is being explained. This woman, John, that we're talking about, is present tense. Mm-hmm. She has rule, present tense. What do we do with that?
I think there's two ways to understand it, right? Two possible ways. One possible way would be to understand it along the preterist line, that it's a city in John's time that has, in John's time, sovereignty over the kings of the earth. That would be one option. Another option is to consider how the verb to be in the Greek eimi here is like the woman whom you saw is the great city. That verb is not always used with a focus on time. It can be used as like an equal sign, right? So the woman equals the great city equals Babylon. You see an example of that in Revelation 1:20. If we go there, just so it doesn't seem there's just an idea out of my own mind, but we consider textual evidence for that. In Revelation 1:20, in Revelation 1, John sees Jesus and there's the lampstands, and all the vision that he sees there in chapter 1, and then he's provided with some explanation that he reports right here toward the end of chapter 1. So see in Revelation 1 verse 20, as for the mystery of the 7 stars which you saw in my right hand, and the 7 golden lampstands, the 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. Here it has nothing to do with time. The point is, this means this, that means that, this equals this equals that, right? Now, what is more complicated, I think, is that says this is the great city that has ruling authority or sovereignty over.
I was going to say that, that solves the one problem, but the
Exactly.
other one's still there.
Exactly. So there's those 2 presents
Yeah.
to be dealt with, right? I think the first one is more simple. The second one, I think it's actually not that difficult because it still can be interpreted in 2 ways, and then you have to consider the context. I don't think this is a matter that you solve just looking at verse 18. But first we need to show that there is this possibility, right? So one possibility is that this is the great city that now has authority out there in the real world, in current time, in John's time, over the kings of the earth. That will be one way to interpret it, one possible way, looking at just verse 18. And one other possible way is that you have the vision. What is the picture that John saw? He saw the woman, he saw the different elements of the vision, the beast and the different parts of the beast, and these different parts are interpreted, including powers and kings. And this woman is riding that beast, and there's a relationship between that woman and those kings in the scene. So the woman that in the scene has power over the kings in the scene, that's the city. You see? So if you consider it that way, it does not have to be a way that has any temporal focus at the time of John. It's just that in the scene, this has power over that.
But it is an explanation.
Sorry?
It's speaking to John, and it says some things are future, some things are past within that section, you see. So the present tense, I think, does seem to have certain power here.
Well, but I really think that there's 2 possibilities, right? So I think that the
I'd like
way
you to
you're
be
going to...
right, by the way.
Huh?
I'd like you to be right, by the way.
No,
I'm just
that's-
saying I'm not sure that that's super convincing just yet.
Because I'm saying that's not the whole case, right?
Yeah.
One way or another, that's not the whole case. I'm just saying that just looking at this chapter, you see the possibility that he's giving the temporal focus in the historical present of that John's time. And the other one is just that this is the one that has authority over the kings of the earth, and the kings of the earth are other elements of the vision itself. So he's talking about the relationship between the different elements in the vision. This is the vision you saw. This has this relationship to this other part of the vision. Now, whether this is end time or in the first century and onwards, then you have to look at other elements in the book. There are many things in the New Testament that are like that, right? That you can't solve a puzzle, if we can put it like that, just looking at that text. Context is a must, right? So you have to look at the whole vision and the context of the book and the narrative, the eschatological narrative, and see, well, I should not say eschatological narrative because then I'm assuming it's
honest,
time.
I've never seen you so fired up about anything.
No, I mean, I'm really excited about the text, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at this, it depends on what you make of what comes before, right? So we have placed chapter 17 in relationship to chapter 16. So you have to go back. Where's chapter 16? Now, we have understood chapter 16 as end time. Well, but why? Well, because we understand chapter 15 had related to also end time. And then, but why? Then we got to go back and consider the whole narrative. So the conclusion of whether or not this is going to be end time or first century will depend on what one makes with the narrative arc of the book more general.
Okay, let's give others a bit of a chance here. But any thoughts, Iris or Gustavo? Is that a convincing argument?
I should side with the Brazilian here.
Oh, no. We need to mix it up a little.
I think with some of the observations that Guilherme made make sense. I don't have a strong opinion about it as my Brazilian fellow here has. But I would say that in order for the vision to make sense to John in that interpretation, the angel who is interpreting starting in verse 15 is anchoring that with something that is part of John's reality. And so it is pointing to a particular city that maybe is a glimpse of what will happen later in the vision. Because I was going over verse 15 onwards in the explanation, it talks about the prostitute, the woman that is seated, and talking about the waters that are peoples. And then when talking about the 10 horns, it's describing an action in the future. They will hate the prostitute. So it is almost like the angel in his explanation is going back and forth.
And that's just 2 verses ahead of this. And that's a time reference there. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think there might be a reality to anchor that explanation, a present reality for John's audience to hear and understand that explanation from the angel. If whether or not they understood is beyond the point, but I think it is part of the explanation of the angel here.
Iris, help us out.
Well, are we assuming that these are personal messages for John? Or is God conveying something that may be much bigger than his time and his situation, that gives him a message for the future, but also an understanding in parts of what are the bigger issues that are unfolding, that without this revelation would seem like, why am I here on Patmos? Why is all of this happening? I feel like God is speaking to him through very powerful metaphors. And it's very interesting that there's not one word, but that he uses several metaphors that are conveying different aspects and are also connecting to different parts in the story. For example, the woman gives him a linkage to chapter 12 and the wilderness and the church there that is persecuted by the dragon. So we know that this entity is a religious institution. We see that, yes, what he understands is, wow, something horrible is happening to this woman. It's changing into a prostitute all of a sudden. And he is shocked.
If that's the woman,
Yeah.
if the woman is a religious institution, it can't be first century. Because where's that institution in the first century?
Yeah, so in some ways, probably then from John's perspective, there is something in the future that horrifies him, that God conveys to him that is
But
happening.
in some way, it's also present. So I like what both of you are saying. Okay, I think that's really helpful, what you just said, Iris, because I think it provides another perspective. The reality is, if you've worked your way through Revelation, Babylon is not the biggest enemy. Lurking behind Babylon is something much bigger.
Right.
It's a person and it's also a principle. And what I think is helpful here is you go to the letter of John. I think it's 1 John. In 1 John, he says, Antichrist is coming. But many antichrists are already here. Let's try this out, right? I'm going to throw this out and you guys can come back at me, okay? But it seems to me this is analogous to that, in that Babylon is coming. All right? End time Babylon is coming. It's in John's future. But many Babylons are already here. Rome as an empire is forcing worship. It's deceiving people about the truths relating to God, etc. So that's already there. In the Middle Ages, they were entities that enforced worship and sometimes distorted the biblical message, etc. So it's bigger than just this one future entity. There's a larger principle, and behind it all lurks Satan, the ultimate conflict between Christ and Satan.
I was just going to say that part of this realities that you see in Revelation, especially chapters 13 and onward, the idea of persecution, opposing power, and so on, we have glimpses of that in the first century. And we see Jesus talking about people hating you and persecuting you, will be throwing away from churches, and Paul warning Christians that after he departs, people will come and, what is the metaphor there? The lambs travestied with the
wolves in sheepskin, right?
That is the expression that I was looking for. Thank you. So that is part of the reality that we see already a glimpse in the New Testament church, or the early church, the first decades of the church, which later in history are much bigger, more comprehensive, and there is the institutional power behind. But we have those realities already in the life of the early church.
But the specific picture we have in 17 is nowhere to be found in the first century. Because think about it, originally persecution against Christians was Jew on Jew. And then I went to think, well, that could be the woman.
Gentiles later.
But they certainly did not have power over kings of the earth. They were a minority themselves. So that can't be. So it can't be Judaism. What about Rome? Well, do we really think that Rome can be adequately represented as having these clothes that kind of resemble the clothes of the high priest, that parallel, as a counter negative parallel with the woman in chapter 12, which actually flees from Rome? And it really does not seem to fit the historical context in the first century. Although you have persecution, but you don't have a primarily religious power that rules over the kings of the earth and persecute Christians in the first century. You had a primarily, well, Rome was not just secular, was religious, but the parallels here with the high priestly garments, all of that, they don't seem to fit Rome, especially when you put together with the narrative in chapter 12 and how chapter 17 relates to chapter 12. So I don't think that the picture in chapter 17 fits first century at all. And then even if you scroll down in history, go to second century, then Rome's persecution becomes, I think, more Roman and Christian. And then, yeah, but then again, that doesn't fit because it doesn't seem to fit Rome. And eventually, when Rome becomes Christian, well, that actually helps persecution to stop. It's not that it's a great thing for Christianity because then it leads to apostasy. So it's not great, but it doesn't really fit. Judaism in the first century, which was the first great persecutor of Jews, of Christians, which was Jewish Christians, right? Like when Paul was persecuting, it's a Jew and Jew. Doesn't fit Rome in the first century, doesn't fit Rome in the second century. Later, when you have it with Constantine and the quote-unquote Christianization of Rome, it doesn't fit the picture because then persecution stops. And it just doesn't fit the first centuries at all, the picture itself. So even though what happens here is that, and this ties back to the pedigree of the beast, that you look at the different beasts throughout the centuries that have been used by Satan to promote persecution, all these different powers, you can look and see similarities between this picture and previous pictures because there has been persecution and apostasy, all those kinds of things throughout the centuries. It's part of maybe the pedigree, but it doesn't fit the picture that is here. This picture is quite unique. And then this picture will be maybe more similar to what you see in the Middle Ages. But then it doesn't fit the book because what the book seems to be saying is that there will be that apostasy, but something will happen again later. So this seems to be then what will happen later that resembles what happened in the Middle Ages. See, that's what fits best in terms of historical fulfillment with the picture here. I just don't see how the pieces fit in the first century at all.
I have one comment, and I will offer the solution, okay? The comment is, so granted, all the arguments that you laid out make a lot of sense, but then what is the meaning of this saying of 1 John that the Antichrist is coming, but there are many among us.
Yes.
And then you have Peter saying his farewell, I think it is the first letter, to those who are in Babylon. So there is already an association of Rome with the city of Babylon. And my solution, okay, as someone who is coming to this book from a totally different angle, I spend more time with the Old Testament. And there are some characteristics of prophetic messages in the Old Testament and in the broader world in which the Old Testament was written, the prophecies that you encounter in places like Nineveh and Babylon. Sometimes the prophecy on purpose is with double meaning, on purpose. And the clearest example for me is the prophecy of Jonah to Nineveh. So the way he preached, like that short sentence, in 40 days and it will be, in our Bibles, is subverted or overturned. That's one way to read it. But the other way is to be turned upside down or to be transformed. So which one is correct? And I mean, even the book of Joel, the title, Joel, it is double meaning. God is Yahweh or Yahweh is God, like it's pointing both ways. So there is something Jewish, if you want, about this potato or either or, not either or, sorry, both. Maybe you're right, and I think you are, but it could also be the other scenario. John is Jewish, so he is bringing all this baggage into the conversation here on Revelation. I think part of this intricacies in the interpretation of Revelation might be due to this, you can say, lack of assertiveness of a Western mind behind the book of Revelation, because that's not how they thought. And so that is my solution, in quotes, to this.
So my sense is that we feel comfortable that we can defend the idea that this is still part of an end time situation. But at the same time, the principle of Babylon is bigger than Babylon as a specific entity. That principle was there in the first century. Luther often identified the medieval church as Babylon, and then he says that the Pope I fear the most is Pope self. There's a bigger principle that's going on. The other's more of a poster child. There's a bigger principle going on. So I think we can leave it there because I think we had a good discussion about the whole thing. But we have just a few minutes left. I want to throw a fun question at you. Chapter 17, if you were doing a devotional out of chapter 17, what would you do? All right? And that's an open question. Any of you can jump in.
Oh, there are several options.
All right, we'll let you start. Maybe keep it to a minute. And,
I will do a comparison
give them a
between Revelation
chance.
17 and 12. Contrast the two women, and which women do you want to be like?
okay.
Or contrast this city and the heavenly city, the great city Babylon and New Jerusalem. Which city do you want to belong in, right? And there's other options, but just some that can be fun and also make it interactive.
Oh, I like that very much. Good job, right off the cuff, just like that. Iris or Gustavo, what would you do?
I'm still processing mine.
I only know one theologian who has attempted to write a devotional book on every verse of Revelation. And
Sounds like a weirdo to me.
I would just get that book out of the shelf and would look, what does he have to say? And I actually, in preparation for today, I looked at that, and I'm quite impressed at gems that you crystallized out of that. I think for me personally, I think the biggest problem that one is facing with chapter 17 as a believer is basically the Job experience. We are well familiar with God holding his hand over us, making our lives better, helping us find a job, helping us find our keys. We have more peace in our heart. We all agree on that. But all of a sudden, the whole turn, my life takes a very different direction. And I need a framework that helps me to understand that God still cares as much. I'm still his beloved daughter, even though I may be stepping into the darkness with him. God is still trustworthy. He is still the God who will ultimately win the battle, even though I may not have the positive outcome that I'm praying for.
Well, you jumped on the very thing I was going to say.
Oh, sorry.
Just read verse 17 and move on to Gustavo. That is, God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to give the beast their power to rule until God's words are fulfilled. So that's sort of a philosophical statement in the middle of chapter 17 that says, when all this stuff goes down and everything looks out of control, God is still behind. You don't have to be afraid. Whatever happens here is only temporary, and God is in control. Gustavo, what are you thinking?
I think it was Sam Harris, one of the new atheists, not so much new these days, who wrote a book, A Letter to a Christian Nation. So my devotional will be titled A Letter to a Christian Nation. And in that book, he's criticizing America and pointing the flaws of the biblical ethics. But my focus will be, at the end of time, the enemy will be within Christianity. We'll have a Christian face. And we have to be careful with the way we present religion into the public arena, because the mixture of state and religion, politics and religion, is a deadly game, as we see here.
Very good. All right. So we took one of the toughest chapters in the Bible and brought out some possible ways in which our lives can be changed for the positive. I mean, one thing I take out of this chapter is evil can be tremendously attractive. I mean, it talks about sexuality, between the woman and the kings of the earth. It talks about wealth, especially in chapter 18. It can make you rich, and riches can be like the amazing thing in your life. Sin can look very attractive, but what Revelation does is say, look at the outcome. Yes. Don't sell yourself into this thing without carefully considering.
Yes.
So, any prophetic surprises this week? It's been good to be with you, GPS, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.